And now let's start creating our application. So what I have done is that I have just created an empty directory, and I highly encourage you to follow along as well. So go ahead, create an empty directory, call it whatever you want, and open that up in your code editor. And now I'm going to create two different files. One is app.js, where we're going to write our Node.js code, and another one which is command.txt. And in this file, we're going to write our commands. So what we are going to do is that we are going to watch this file and look for events. Okay, so and the type of events that we're actually looking for is the change event. So whenever I change this file, I'm going to get the content of the file and see what the user has specified, what the user has commanded to do, what are the instructions, and just go ahead and do that. So the first step for us is to start to kind of watch this file. All right, so let's see how we can do it. Now, if you go ahead and open up the documentation of Node.js and start to look for how you could watch a file, so what you could do is just search for watch, and right here we could find some examples. So if I start from the first one, which is in the promises section, so in the promises API, we have this function available to us called fspromises.watch. So I'm going to use this function to watch for changes that happen in that file. And I actually read this before, so I'm not going to do it right now, but let's just go ahead and do it. So what we can do is just, first of all, we have to include the fs module. So require fs, and we want to use the promise version, so fs/promises. And then I'm going to create an immediately invoked function just so that I could use the async await syntax. And also just one point that I want to say, it's a JavaScript note. Whenever we're doing this, we're actually, it's not, the only benefit is not that we could use the async await syntax, it's also that we are limiting our scope. So if I define a variable here, for example, const a equals this, I cannot do it again here. I'm gonna get an error that it's a const and you cannot redefine it, but if I move it out of this function, I could do it no problem. So the variables that I have here, variables, functions, objects, whatever, are completely separated from the ones that I have here. So it's a nice technique to use to limit your scope, and I'm not really going to teach you what scope is in JavaScript. If you don't know what it is, you need to learn about it, you need to research, because it's very important, and you gotta learn how scoping works in JavaScript as someone who wants to use Node.js. So I'm just going to say scope. Okay, so if you don't know that, go ahead and search for it and see what you could learn about it, because it's really important. Okay, anyway, so let's now go ahead and start to use that function. So I'm going to say fs.watch, and here we could either specify a file name or we could specify a directory. In this case, I'm going to watch my whole directory, so I'm just going to say /, and then I'm going to save it into a variable called watcher. Now what this watcher is that it's an async iterator. Okay, if you're not familiar with async iterator and async generator, let's just write the code and then I'm going to explain it pretty quick. So now that we have our async iterator, we could go ahead and iterate through it. So I'm going to say for await const event of watcher, and then right here I'm just going to log the event to see what we're dealing with. Okay, and I made a mistake somewhere. Let me just put in the semicolon so that my formatting won't be messed up. All right, so with this in place, we're now watching this whole directory and we are logging all the events that happen. Again, this is an async iterator, so if you go ahead and search for that in the JavaScript, it's an actually ES6 functionality, so it's just recently came to JavaScript. As you can see, this is how you use that for await of statement to loop through those, the function that returns data asynchronously. So you'll see this function here and there in JavaScript. It is usually used for whenever we want to read a data and data is coming asynchronously. So this async generators and async iterators are used in those cases. This is as much as I'm going to talk about this because it's really related to JavaScript and nothing related to Node.js. But if you really don't understand this async generator and iterator and you don't care to go ahead and learn about it, you could just as easily change this to a callback version. And to be honest, it could look cleaner if you are not really familiar with this async generator concept. So you could do that, but I'm not going to do it in this video. So really, it's up to you. If this doesn't make sense to you, and if you don't care to go ahead and learn about it, just change the syntax to a callback syntax. And you could just learn about it here in the documentation. So I think it's called fs.watch. Let's see if we could find that function. Yeah, it's right here. So fs.watch. And then you could see the syntax right here. So you just say watch some directory or a file name, and then you specify the callback. But I'm going to stick with the promise version. Okay, so with this in place, let's now go on ahead and run it and just get some events, okay? So I'm going to say node app.js, and now this is running. And because this function keeps running, we're not quitting. So what I'm going to do right now is to come to my command.txt file, and I want to issue an event. Now if I change this, now, and keep in mind that if you're typing right here in your code editor or your text editor application, you're not actually changing the content of the file. So whatever you're doing here, you're doing it in your memory, in your RAM. As soon as you save, you are saving those changes onto the file. So you are going to your hard drive, to your disk, and then you're saving the content there. And at that point, you are changing the file. So right now, no events. As soon as I save, I'm going to get an event right here. And as you can see, it has two different properties. It's an object. We have the event type, which is change, and the file name that was changed. In this case, it's command.txt. Now let's go ahead and play around with it a little bit. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call it newfile.txt. And if I create this one, go back to my code editor, to my terminal, I can see that this time around event type is rename, and the file name is this one. So whenever you delete a file or you rename a file or you create a file, you're going to get this rename event. So if I, for example, delete this now, I'm going to get another rename event type. Now, if you're wondering how in the world how we could figure out if it was an actual rename or if it was, creating that file or if it was deleted, what you could do is to just use other FS module functions to look for that. So if you see the event type, you could just check, see if that file still exists, or some things like that to figure out if it was deleted or if it was renamed or just recently created. But for our application, we don't really care about this rename event. All we care about is the change event. So if I come to this file, or actually any file, so if I create a new file and I start to change the content of this file, I'm going to get the change event. So if I save, I'm going to get the event type of change. And this is the file name that was changed, file.txt. Now one thing that's kind of weird is that whenever I'm saving, I'm getting this event type change twice. So I don't have anything, and if I just do one save, actually this time I got one, but sometimes in this case I got two. Now the reason that we're sometimes getting duplicate events is not super clear. It's more related to the operating system, file system behavior, and the way they fire events for files and directories, and it's something beyond the control of Node.js. It could also be because of the application that we're using for modifying the file. I did notice that the repetitions were different from app to app. For example, on Windows using Visual Studio Code, I usually got the change events 3 or even 4 times, but I could barely get a double change event when using the Notepad. So we could say that it's a double saving thing, let's just call it that, but actually it could sometimes be related to the operating system itself, and well, it's not that big of a deal and we don't really care. We do see that in the Node.js documentation about this fs.watch, that it says that the fs.watch behavior is not 100% consistent across platforms, but in our application it'll be fine. We'll build it in a way so that these multiple identical events won't cause us any problems. Now, if it's just one file, we could also alternatively check the file modification type. It's called mtype, and the file stats if you try to log that.
and we could have a set interval to run every second and check the modification time. If it's changed, that means that we have a change, so we could also do it that way. Anyway, this is as far as I'm going to talk about this double event thing. You might get this more or less, but it doesn't matter. The app should work just fine regardless of this condition.
So this is how we are going to watch that file. We're watching this directory and we're looking for really any changes that happen. But we don't need to watch for everything. We just need to watch for the event type that is of change and the file name, which is command.txt. So what I can do is to say if event.eventType is equal to change and event.filename is equal to command.txt. Now at this point, well, the file was changed. And we're going to do our operations. So let's just do a quick log. So I'm going to say constant log, the file was changed. So let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm going to run the application, and now if I delete this file.txt file, I'm not going to see anything in my terminal, so nothing happens. But as soon as I change this file like this and I save, I'm going to get that log. And again, as I said before, we're sometimes going to get that event twice, that change event twice. But the point is that at this point, we are now ready to read the contents of this file and actually do something with it. So we could watch and see if it says create a file or rename a file or whatever else that we might want to do. Now, one more point is that this watcher, this fs.watch function, it could either accept a directory or just a file name. So if you accept a directory, it's going to watch this whole directory. If I create a new file or if I change really any file, it's going to kick in. But I don't need to do this. All I want to do in this case is to watch this command.txt file. So what I'm going to do is to change this from watching the whole directory to change it to only watch that command.txt file. And if I save, and if I run my application again and I save, I'm going to get that change event again. And also, we don't need to now check for the file name, because at this point, when we reach this point, the file name is this one, because we're only watching that file. So what I'm going to do is to just go ahead and remove this second condition. Now what happens is that we are watching that file, and whenever this event type of change happens, now here we are going to do our work. Okay, so let's try this one more time. I'm going to save, and there we go.
Alright, now we're successfully getting notified every time this file changes, and with this in place, we are now ready to move on ahead and read the contents of the file every time a change happens. So we're going to continue on with this in the next video.